Have you ever been in a situation where you felt that you needed to do something or not do something just because you were a man or a woman? Was there suddenly an expectation that you hadn't signed up for, or some invisible rule for what to do or not to do? This could have been in a professional setting or in a private setting. If you're a woman, maybe you have been in a business meeting and all the other participants were men. Someone needed to take notes, and for whatever reason, the expectation was that you should take the notes. If you're a man, maybe you have invited a woman out for a date, for dinner, and at the end of the evening, you were expected to pay for the whole bill. Maybe this situation surprised you, or maybe it didn't because you had encountered it before. Maybe this incident, if you're thinking about one, made you smile. Maybe it made you feel alive, or even sexy. Or maybe it frustrated you or made you feel offended. Can you think of such a situation for yourself? I suspect that most of you do, or at least the women in the room. I remember a time when I was going out with a woman from another culture than my own for the very first time. And we were hanging out in our apartment in Milan, in Italy. And I had done some laundry, and I had just started ironing my shirts when my girlfriend comes up to me with this quizzical look on her face. She says, "Let me tell you, I already saw you do the laundry, and if you continue to iron those shirts, you're going to turn me off so much that I'm not going to sleep with you for weeks." So needless to say, I put the iron away, and I was ready to wear wrinkly shirts from that moment on. You see, I come from Sweden, one of the Scandinavian countries that in any study or any survey around either quality or quality of life always come up on top. And today I would like to explore with you how can that be. Earlier this summer, a good friend of mine overheard a conversation between two young American men walking on the streets of southern Stockholm for the very first time. This is the quote she captured for me. "Hey, dude, what's up with all the gay nannies?" It turns out there aren't that many gay nannies in southern Stockholm. But what we do have is a lot of well-dressed men pushing around prams with their own babies inside. We even have a colloquial name for them in Swedish. We call them the lattepappa, a combination of the Swedish word for father, which is pappa, and a latte, as in a cafe latte, the lattepappa. So this word describes the flock behavior of Swedish men on paternity leave, where they take out their prams and their babies, and they meet with their fellow lattepappas on the local cafes. So there they sit, they gossip around what's going on in the world, and they make the same kind of bonding that maybe most men would do, but this kind involves toddlers, fancy coffee, and cinnamon buns, instead of perhaps football and beer. So this quote, "Dude, what's up with all the gay nannies?" in all its prejudice and horrific stereotyping, captures a real relevant challenge for many men, namely, what is expected of us as men? What are we allowed to do and still be men? And the quote also indicates that in Sweden we seem to have different norms for what we expect of our men. So this lattepappa character, he might not look that much to the world, but as far as men goes, he's actually much more likely than either Iron Man or Superman to save the world. So how can it be then that in Sweden, men seems to have different expectations, different norms, and conversely, women have more opportunities as well? Well, the answer lies in how we are working with expanding and changing both attitudes and stereotypes as it pertains to being a man or a woman. So let me explain that. We are born with a biological sex. In most cases, that is as a man or a woman. In case you're wondering, the blue on your left is a man. And being of a biological sex comes with certain biological differences, some of which we are intimately familiar with, but perhaps not as many as we think when it comes to our behaviors. Instead, what happens is that we are nurtured into this set of behaviors and attributes that are associated with either more masculine or more feminine stuff. And this thing, this construction, that's what we call gender, and it's different from our biological sex. Many times this seems harmless or innocent, and we do it without even noticing it, like when we buy blue clothes for a baby boy or pink clothes for a baby girl. But what happens over time is that we get fostered into these stereotypical gender roles, and before we notice it, we are stuck, we are locked in this largely predetermined, invisible space. I call it the gender spot, or the G-spot. So the gender spot sets the convention for what we expect of each other for both men and women. Like in the beginning, remember? I just asked you to think about an example, a point in time when you were expected to either do something or not do something because you were a man or a woman. Now, I don't know what your situation was, the one you were thinking about, but most likely it is the case that whatever it was, that's a gender spot in action. So for men, these gender spots include things like when something breaks, we are supposed to fix it. Or we are not supposed to express emotions, unless maybe anger. And of course, we are supposed to be the breadwinners of families. For women, these gender associations include things like, yes, we are allowed to and expected to be much more of that emotional stuff. We are expected to be quiet or less outspoken. And of course, women are vastly superior to any man when it comes to looking after a child. But the thing, of course, is for each of these givens, for each of these notions, there is very little evidence, if any, but still these stereotypes, they're all around us. They're really strong, and many times we collude in maintaining these. So, what are your gender spots? Do you know? Have you ever thought about this? Are they strong or weak? Are they helpful? Or are they limiting for you? Are you consistent? A female friend of mine said to me, well, of course we're equal, but I still want a man to pay for dinner and buy me shiny things. Let's try this as an experiment. I just told you about the latte papa, the guy who spends his day changing diapers and sipping coffee with his buddies. Some of you might have been thinking, wow, that's really wonderful. That's the kind of man I want to have or be. But some of you might have been thinking, oh, what's that? That's not a real man. That's not for me. So either one of those positions is an example of a gender spot or your gender spots in action. So what Sweden and the Scandinavian countries have done really, really well, and which to a large degree accounts for why things are different there, it's to broaden these spots, to enhance this space of what is both accepted and possible for both men and women. That is something that has happened through a lot of political reform and legislation, trying to nudge adults into new kinds of behaviors. But in parallel to that, paying really, really careful attention to how we raise our children. So that has included enforcing gender-neutral toy catalogs. And yes, that means girls playing with guns and boys playing with dolls. Or in kindergarten, when boys are being taught how to express emotions, and girls are taught how to hammer a nail or build awesome things out of Lego. And we pay attention to the stories we tell our kids. Some of you might be familiar with Pippi Longstocking, a strong, rebellious, independent girl, Swedish girl, who owns her own house. So what the Scandinavian example shows us is that when you systematically work with removing these limitations that the gender spots impose on us, we end up creating some of the most equal and some of the most prosperous countries in the world. On an individual level, when you broaden this repertoire of what both men and women can do, you create completely new opportunities, both for what you have and what you can accomplish together. You build this new intersection, a joint gender spot. But I call this the growth zone, or the growth spot, because growth is what happened in this place. So being in this middle, in this growth zone, it doesn't mean that you have to give up being a man or a woman, whatever that might mean for you. But it means you have the opportunity to cast off other people's ideas around what it is you can do or not do. It allows you to remove these boundaries and barriers that have snuck their way into our lives and our society. So if you are a man and you're standing here in this growth zone, you can still be a man, but you can be more than that. You can have more possibilities. You can be a latte papa, if you want to. And as a woman standing here in this intersection in the growth zone, you can still be a woman, but you can be more than that. You don't have to follow in the norms of other people. You can craft your own path. You can have more opportunities and more choices. Now, maybe you like how that sounds. Maybe you would like to have some more opportunities and choices. Maybe you would like to have some more gender, a bigger gender. Well, the good news is that you can. Because as the example of the latte papa shows us, these gender spots, they're not something fixed or static. Our gender roles can change and evolve if we want them to. And it starts here in the moment, because gender is not a thing which we have. It's actually a pattern of interaction that we create with other people. Gender is something we do. Let me say it again. Gender is something we do in our interactions with other people. And that means we can impact that. And yes, it is important to have the right regulations in place and enabling political reforms. But a core belief in Sweden was always that if you create more equality in the private domain, this will aggregate upwards to help shape society. So that means that here, in this moment, with us, this is where change starts. And this is where the positive disruption can take place. So by being more conscious, by being more aware, we can catch this gender priming as it pops up, and we can help each other catch our thought patterns, and we can lift these limitations up to the foreground, and we can hold them here and say, look, isn't this peculiar? Isn't it? Isn't this peculiar? And once we are aware, we can move to action, intentional action where we try to do things differently. But we have to remember, when we do this, we are actually going up against thousands of years of history and indoctrination of what is the right thing or wrong thing for both men and women. So that means that we have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack. And we have to be skilled in how we do this. Because there is no given right or wrong. There is no predetermined path to take here. Instead, you have to engage in experimentation or improvisation. You have to figure out what works for you and your partner, for you and your family, for you and your colleagues, for you in your local cultural context. And the way you do that is by being playful, by being curious, by testing things out, by starting small and seeing what works. But it's really important that you have the courage to start doing those different moves. If you don't, you might end up in a situation where you and your partner are standing there in each of your gender spots, and you don't have this middle ground. You don't have the shared intersection. What happens then is that we're trying to bridge the two spots using this thing called love. And we end up entrusting love with things that love is not really good at, like dealing with the practicalities of everyday life, whether that includes children, chores, or taking the dog out for a walk when it rains outside. So, if instead you're able to create your shared space, a big, juicy, shared gender spot, both of you can hang out in here together. And when you're able to do that, you can do a completely different sharing. You can do the give and take, which you need to do in order to make both your relationship and your life work. So, working on your gender spots is not only about equality, it is actually about putting down a stronger and better foundation for your love, for your personal and your professional development, and ultimately for your happiness. So, by starting here, in this moment, by making conscious changes, not only will you improve the situation for you and the people close to you, you can also rest assured that your actions will ripple and contribute to a much larger positive change. So by changing your patterns in the moment, you are actually helping, providing more opportunities and more gender for everybody. So I think we should get going. Thank you.